Associates. Lee is the president of Scranton Associates and focuses on regulatory compliance, label design, SDS preparation, and packaging and shipping rules. Jill Cavano is the vice president, schedules production, and handles purchasing. Jill and Lee are both active in AWT. Jill serves on the Young Professionals Task Force, while Lee serves on the Legislative Regulatory Committee. Before Lee takes your questions about GHS, we'll show a short video. With that, we'll start the program.
If there are any issues seeing the video, we will have it up on Scranton Associates website, but we also have a PDF for you to view before we start our question and answers. And everyone can hear us fine now? Perfect. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, and Lee will answer them for you. The PDF will also be available on Scranton's website later today as well.
Lee, for the label, what is necessary for the product identifier, CAS number, etc.? And also, do the label and pictures need color?
The pictograms on the SDS should be bordered in red. I don't know how crucial this is. One of the changes in changing the MSDS format to the SDS format is that the CAS numbers are not included, nor are the identities of the components, the hazardous components, in Section 2. That would be included in one of the following sections, the one that is specifically for the chemical data and the details of the product's appearance and specific gravity, pH, all of that sort of thing. So that is in a second section. Section 2 basically just gives the precautionary statements and the hazard classes and the basic storage, or well, not so much storage, but Section 2 is not where you identify the components.
Do the labels and pictures need color?
On the SDS, yes, the pictograms should be bordered by red. I don't know how big of an issue that is. On the label as well, they should be bordered by red.
Can you put NFPA or HMIS items in Section 2?
No.
Can you state where I can find documentation on it? What you just answered.
Oh, okay. The NFPA and HMIS information is helpful, and many people choose to include it. OSHA has ruled that that does not fulfill its right-to-know requirements, but many end users use one of those systems for their own in-plant safety programs. So that HMS NFPA would probably be in one of the later sections. I don't recall the number, the regulatory one probably.
With regard to limited quantities, are the labels going to change?
To the best of my knowledge, no. This is entirely overseen by OSHA, and when you get into reportable quantities and limited quantities, that's more of an EPA situation.
If multiple pictograms in Section 2, does the label need all of them?
Yes, the label would need all of the pictograms unless it was shipped as a corrosive and had the proper DOT corrosive label. Then the corrosive pictogram would not be required on the label. The same would apply to something shipped as an oxidizer. If it has the correct DOT oxidizer label, the oxidizer pictograms would not be required on the label. They would still, however, be required on the SDS.
On Section 3 of the SDS, how much of the product formula is needed? All components or just the hazardous ones?
Basically just the hazardous ones. A number of products we've found are hazardous because of their pH. HEDP would be an example. Once that's neutralized, that would no longer be a hazard. On the SDS that I have worked through, I have seen that a number of them actually provide less identity ingredient for the ingredients than on many of the MSDSs that are out there.
Do our customers who have existing products later than December 2015, will they need drum labels replaced, or are they grandfathered in?
I think that there is a provision for existing stock up until December of 2015. So I guess if by the letter of the law, I'm guessing that you would probably want to provide new labels to them. Although how much, how many people are going to request this and how much this is going to be overseen by OSHA or other regulatory people, that I don't know. This is a big change. It's not something that's going to be easily accomplished on a lot of formulas. So that is something that I guess we'll kind of see how it works out. But I guess by the letter of the law, yes, you would want to give them new labels. But I'm sure not everyone will have them in time. And as I mentioned, I'm repeating myself, but I don't know how much this will be looked into by OSHA.
How does confidential business information impact SDS output?
That probably shouldn't change. Just like on the existing MSDSs, if you have proprietary information, you state it as such. So my understanding on proprietary or information or trade secrets is that if it could be reverse engineered easily, you cannot claim it as proprietary or a trade secret. And that's always the balancing act. You want to fulfill your obligations and your duties by providing the accurate and up-to-date right-to-know information so that people handling these chemicals know how to use them, what happens if they're exposed to them, how to store them, how to get rid of them, how to ship them, those sort of things.
And the next question, are you done with that one?
I'm lost my train of thought on that one.
Well, the question that you were answering, just to recap, is someone asked, how does confidential business information impact SDS output? And it may go along with the next question where somebody put, if our product is a proprietary blend, do we need to add all the components?
Again, a proprietary blend, that's kind of a gray area. Again, if it's something that can be easily reverse engineered, you really have no justifiable reason to claim proprietary. And people want to people don't want to give away their formulas, but yet they do want to provide the correct information to the end users. So that's kind of a tough one. But as I had mentioned to answer to an earlier question, not all of the components are going to need to be identified specifically on the SDS, only the ones that are hazardous in the final formulation rather than in the raw material form.
Okay, the next question is, can you put Canadian symbols in Section 2? And if you can, where can I find documentation as to what is not acceptable in that section?
That I do not know. This is administered by OSHA, which is from the United States. I don't think OSHA has any authority in Canada. And Canada is one of the countries that has not yet adopted this global harmonization, and I don't know what their time frame for adoption is.
Does non-regulated material need any changes?
Yes. There are some changes that will be required. Sodium sulfite is a good example. There are some people who have allergic reactions to sodium sulfite. You see that on like wines that say contain sulfites. So that would then trigger one of the pictograms, and this is one of the problems with the labeling, is that there is going to be pictograms required on some products that ship as non-regulated. Some of the components like HPAA, hydroxyphosphonoacetic acid, the corrosion inhibitor, that does function as a sensitizer to some extent. So even if you have that in a formula where it's neutralized and it is not shipping as DOT regulated as a corrosive, you would still need to reflect that hazard in Section 2 and use the appropriate pictograms.
EPA-regulated biocides are not required to follow SDS. Is this correct?
I don't know. I know that the labels are still administered by the EPA, and SDS global harmonization should not change any of the United States EPA labels. I do not know for sure whether the SDSs would need to be changed for those products. Probably the biocide manufacturers would be the best ones to address that.
Office of Environmental Health and Safety at Northeastern University has released information that the last date of June 1st, 2016 as the date to have all in place, and June 1st, 2015 for just labels. Is this correct or not?
I think it probably is. June 15th or June of 2015 would be for the labels and the SDSs. And while this has been around for a year or two, I think that there would be a time allowed. So I'm guessing that you're correct. I don't have any documentation for that. But as I had mentioned earlier, I don't know how much this is going to be enforced or on what timeline. The OSHA people have plenty to do as it is already. I don't see them spending a whole lot of time coming down hard on this, at least not initially.
But as it pertains to our industry, yes, the SDSs and labels, like Lee said, that goes into effect June 1st of this year. If a product is not classified as hazardous per the regulations, do the labels require any additional information, or can you continue to use the existing labels?
I think I just had answered that on another question, but there are going to be some components like sodium sulfite or some corrosion inhibitors, and there's a few others, I'm sure, that while they're not regulated by DOT as a corrosive or a flammable or as an oxidizer, they do still have some health hazards which would require that pictograms be included in Section 2 of the SDS.
EPA-regulated biocides are not required to follow the labeling requirements either? Question mark.
Correct. Biocides are overseen by EPA, not OSHA.
And somebody wrote a comment pertaining to Canadian callers in, says Canadian people. WHIMS will start being phased out starting June 2015 over a period of 3 years. WHIMIS SDS is separate from the GHS data sheet. Thank you for sending that. How does this affect reagents?
That I don't know. I would imagine that many reagents, due to the small sizes, would probably ship with consumer exemptions. Just like if you go buy a Bic lighter, it doesn't have all of the flammable, all of the hazards. It doesn't have the DOT. It's a practical concern. The container is not big enough. Small containers of reagents would probably have the same consumer exemptions on the labeling. And then the reagent suppliers, however, probably would generate SDSs for those reagents.
If you're making a batch tank to feed a cooling tower, can you put two products together in the tank? Do you place a copy of each label on the tank?
That would depend on the compatibility of the products and whether there was any reaction between them. It probably would be a good idea to cover it, to just put the labels for each of them, assuming that they're put in at the same quantities.
How long must an end user maintain SDS when the product is no longer in use?
Don't recall off the top of my head, but of course the longer is better. I think it's maybe 5 years, but I'm not sure on that. I tend to keep everything forever.
Where can we locate information on which pictograms need to be on non-regulated material?
This is all in the Federal Register. In Title 29, the references was given early as to the numbers, but this is all in the Federal Register.
And we have that where you can look in the Federal Register. We'll be putting this presentation on the Scranton website, and it's also listed in the PDF that we have up that you can feel free to print out. If you have to list ingredients, if you have to list the ingredients of your formula, do you have to list the percentage of each?
No. Again, some of the ingredients, while they may be hazardous in their straight, neat form, as again like HEDP, once it's neutralized, is no longer going to be considered a hazard and would not have to be listed. And the percentages is generally a end-user-driven concern. Often on their right to know, their SARA reporting, they have to be aware of the quantities of different types of hazards that they have on their site. So they may need to know whether they need to consider the full drum of your product as a hazard or just the active components as a hazard. So OSHA does not require percents, but your customers may request that. the way most people handle it on the MSDSs would be the same as you could do it on an SDS, is you would give a range. If you have something in at 5%, you'd say like 1 to 10, or something like that. So you don't give it away entirely, but so that you kind of give them a range that they can work with.
If a distributor receives products from a manufacturer prior to June 2015 and they still have them in their stock after December 2015, is the manufacturer required to provide compliant labels once the product has been sent to a distributor?
I would imagine so, because there is that allowance that goes until December that allows existing stock and existing labeling to still be used in commerce. After that June deadline at the end of the year, I would imagine that the responsibility would be to provide new labels to the distributors. Again, I don't know how much this is going to be enforced, especially at the early stages.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, Lee and I would like to, and Heidi and everyone at AWT would like to thank everybody for joining today. It looks like we have one more question. Can you recommend any third-party companies who can generate new SDSs for our current chemical line?
Yes, I can. I'm glad someone asked that. We've been working with a gentleman that I consider to be the authority on this, who his whole business is regulatory projects, and we've used him to generate a number of SDSs for us. And that's a gentleman by the name of Fred Hopkins, and he is in Prairie Village, Kansas. He can be reached by phone at area 913-544-1638, or by email at all small, no spaces, Fred Hopkins at kc.rr.com.
Fred is also an AWT member, and his information can also be found in the AWT directory. Somebody asked, is there a recommended software for the conversion? And I'm going to say that I would suggest also calling Fred, because there's none that I am going to go ahead and recommend. The next question is, do the pictograms have to be part of the product label, or can they be placed next to the product label, like DOT hazard labels?
I don't think that there's an actual requirement that they be on the label, but it sure would make sense to put them on the label. Otherwise, you're going to start getting into bunches of labels for the same product. You might have a product that has 3 or 4 pictograms. So you've got the label itself, you've got 3 or 4 pictograms, you have the DOT labeling. You know, what happens if a gust of wind comes through and all over your shipping dock? The requirement would be that I'm sure that they would have to be adjacent to the label. But just from this practical point of view, it would make a lot more sense to include them on the label.
How dependent will the accuracy of our SDS be on the updated raw material SDS? In other words, can we produce accurate SDSs with our existing raw material MSDSs?
Good question. To a large degree, yes. The existing MSDSs, if they're well done, and most of the ingredients that we use in water treatment have quite good MSDSs, but they're going to give you the toxicity data that is used to calculate the hazard categories, so that the MSDSs still are the basis for making SDSs now. Most of the large corporations may have already generated their SDSs, but are not going to release them until the deadline. They don't want people taking advantage of their work. But once the raw materials start coming through as SDSs, there may be some variation. But for the most part, I think the existing MSDSs would be accurate.
Are there any recommendations for products packaged in small containers requiring extended label content?
Not sure I understand. I'm not sure how small a container you may be looking at, but pretty much the labels are, if anything, are going to have to be bigger than they were before, and I'm sure that the type size would have to be legible, and the DOT labeling is specified their sizes, so that is an issue. The smallest containers that we generally deal with are 5-gallon pails, But if you get into gallon containers or something along that line, that is going to be a concern. You know, some of them may fall under a consumer exemption, but yes, you know, you can't make the type size so small that you can't read it just in order to be able to fit. So that could be an issue, and how big of an issue is going to depend on what size containers, I guess.
With your experience, what size of label do you feel is the best size to fit everything needed with the new label requirements?
That's going to vary. I always encouraged people to try and keep their labels onto an 8.5 by 11 in a black and white format. That way, this was before we had gotten so computerized, but that way you could make changes. You could do a whole lot on a copier just using the 8.5 by 11 size. Once you start including the DOT required labeling, it gets a little bit bigger. Maybe it goes to 8.5 by 14. Hopefully, they're not going to get too much bigger than that, but my feeling has always been to keep it simple, you know, to put the minimum on. You know, the law requires that the label have, now it's going to require that the label have the SDS Section 2, but it's going to have what the product is, whose product it is, and how to contact them, and probably a good general liability statement. And it's going to be a challenge to try and fit that onto labels that are of a size that is practical.
Is there a standard size?
There is not a standard size that I am aware of.
Any restrictions on updating the SDS once we get more information from our raw material suppliers?
I don't know. I know that Canada only considers MSDS as valid for 3 years. To the best of my knowledge, there is no expiration date for SDSs other than if the data on the raw material changes, then I think that you would have the same constraints that have always been in existence on the MSDS, like 30 days or 90 days or something like that.
And then somebody from Canada put on updating the SDSs, they said, update as frequently as required. In Canada, it is mandatory every 3 years. Next question, does the manufacturer information on the label require full address or just the name and number?
I believe it requires contact information. It would require, you know, your name, and if there was an issue, how to get in touch with you. Whether it be email, whether it be phone number, probably as long as it was accurate and someone could get in touch with you promptly, I don't think that the street address would be an issue. Okay, I think. Well, I was going to say, in case there are no more questions, or if there are, thanks for joining us, and I hope the information that I've presented is helpful.
And you can always feel free to get in touch with Jill and Lee Cavano at Scranton Associates. And again, all of this will be made available to you either on our website, or Heidi at AWT is also going to have this available for AWT members on their website. Thank you all for joining us today, and remember, participation is important, and hopefully we'll get some more participation at the Reg Committee in Nashville this year, and also for the Young Professionals Task Force. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.